Get her out! Now! She does not belong here. The store manager's voice sliced through the hushed reverence of the luxury boutique as security guards seized the elegantly dressed black woman by her arms. People like you don't belong in a place like this, sneered a young sales associate, his face a mask of contempt. Around them, customers froze, their shopping forgotten, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. But what happened next defied all expectation. The woman being manhandled toward the exit didn't scream. She didn't struggle. Her voice remained a quiet, steady thing in the sudden, sharp silence. Instead, she fixed her gaze upon the store manager, her eyes possessing a clarity that could cut through steel, and spoke just 7 words that would echo in their nightmares for years to come. You have no idea what you just did. What these employees failed to comprehend was that the woman they were discarding like refuse was not someone to be trifled with. The manager who had barked the order, the associate who had spat the insult, the guards whose hands were now on her arms, they were standing on the precipice of ruin, utterly oblivious. Because when you humiliate the wrong person, when you judge them by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character, when you forget that respect costs nothing and is worth everything, the universe has a way of serving justice on a silver platter. To understand the sheer magnitude of the reckoning that was about to unfold, you must first understand who she was. Her name was Dennis Sterling. At 42, she was the very definition of self-made success. That morning, she had emerged from her luxury Mercedes, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and designer heels, on her way to visit her newest store location for the very first time. Her journey to this moment had been forged in hardship. Growing up in foster care, a ghost drifting from one temporary home to the next, she learned a fundamental truth early on. The world would hand her nothing. While other teenagers worried about prom, Dennis worked 3 jobs to scrape together college tuition. She stocked shelves in the dead of night, served coffee at dawn, and cleaned offices on weekends. Sleep was a luxury she could not afford, but surrender was never an option. Her empire began with a single derelict thrift store that nobody wanted. Where others saw junk, Dennis saw potential. She held a revolutionary vision. Fashion should not only be accessible, but it should also be a source of power, confidence, and beauty for everyone. That one small store became 2, then 5, then 50. From that foundation, she launched Lux Boutique, the high-end fashion line that would make her a multi-millionaire. But success had come at a cost. Just 6 months prior, Dennis had endured a brutal divorce. Her ex-husband had buckled under the weight of her success, unable to tolerate a wife who was the primary earner, the decision-maker, the undisputed boss. The ordeal left her emotionally hollowed out. Recently, she had turned to shopping as a form of therapy, an attempt to reclaim a joy that had become a mere escape from a loneliness that money could not cure. That was why she was here. This location in SoHo was her new flagship, the bold expansion into the elite market she had always dreamed of conquering. For the past 3 months, while she was in Europe closing international deals, the store had been operating under a management team she had trusted but never met. People who were supposed to embody her core values, integrity, vision, and a commitment to treating every single person with dignity. The boutique itself was a temple to fashion, precisely as Dennis had envisioned. Gleaming white marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers, and the clothing displays were curated like fine art installations. This was more than a store, it was a statement, a declaration that Dennis Sterling had ascended to the pinnacle of an industry that had long tried to keep women like her out. But the staff running her dream were strangers to her. Jennifer Walsh, the 38-year-old store manager, had been hired through a top-tier headhunting firm. On paper, she was perfect. Years of luxury retail experience and glowing references. What her polished resume failed to mention was an ugly, deep-seated prejudice. She judged people on sight by their race, their attire, their perceived social standing. In her mind, Lux Boutique was her kingdom, and she alone was its gatekeeper. Her personal hire, Brad Morrison, was 26 and came from the kind of inherited wealth that breeds entitlement. His father's connections had secured him the interview, but it was his sycophantic devotion to Jennifer that had landed him the job. Brad genuinely believed in a social hierarchy, and he took pleasure in reminding customers he deemed unworthy of their place. The security guard, Marcus Thompson, was different. A 35-year-old military veteran, He simply needed a steady paycheck to support his family. Marcus followed orders without question, a trait that had served him well in the army but was about to make him complicit in an act he would forever regret. And then there was Mrs. Catherine Hamilton, a 65-year-old socialite who could spend more in a single afternoon than most people earned in a year. She was the archetype of the customer Jennifer and Brad revered, old money, white, and effortlessly extravagant. She was their ideal, which made her presence during the unfolding drama all the more significant. This is where the story truly begins. Dennis had decided to visit her new store Incognito. She wanted to see, with her own eyes, how her team behaved when the boss wasn't watching. Instead of arriving in her signature power suit, flanked by assistants, she dressed down. Her clothes were tasteful, but they didn't scream wealth or ownership. She wanted the unvarnished truth, the real test of her company's soul. The moment Dennis stepped through the gleaming glass doors, Jennifer's internal radar pinged. She saw a well-dressed black woman browsing the most expensive collection, and her mind leaped to the worst possible conclusion. Without a word, she caught Brad's eye and gave a subtle nod, the silent command to watch this one. Dennis, lost in admiration for her own creation, was oblivious. She ran her fingers along the smooth silk of a gown, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. This was meant to be a moment of triumph. That's when Brad made his move. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes and condescension dripping from every syllable, he approached her. "Excuse me, miss," he began, his tone implying she was already trespassing. "I think you might be more comfortable browsing our more affordable options. We have some lovely pieces on sale toward the back." Dennis felt a familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had heard that tone before, felt the sting of that thinly veiled judgment. Yet she remained composed. Perhaps it was a simple misunderstanding. She politely declined his offer and asked to see one of the designer pieces up close. Brad's mask of courtesy slipped. His smile strained. "Those pieces are quite expensive," he said, his voice sharp, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "I'm not sure they're what you're looking for." At that precise moment, Mrs. Catherine Hamilton swept into the store. The transformation in the staff was instantaneous and nauseating. Jennifer practically sprinted to the door, her face beaming. "Mrs. Hamilton, how wonderful to see you. Please, let me show you our newest arrivals personally." Brad abandoned Dennis mid-sentence, rushing to fawn over their VIP. Dennis stood alone, a silent observer of the grotesque theater. Mrs. Hamilton was offered champagne, a private viewing room, and the undivided attention of the entire staff. Meanwhile, Dennis, the woman who owned every thread in the building, who signed their paychecks, who had built this empire from nothing, was being treated like a potential shoplifter. The test was yielding results more damning than she could have ever imagined. She was seeing her employees' true colors, and they were hideous. But this was only the beginning. The events that followed would expose the true depth of their prejudice and trigger the spectacular implosion of their world. This shopping trip was about to become a masterclass in consequences. Still determined to give them one last chance, Dennis continued to browse. She was drawn to a stunning black evening gown, a piece that demanded attention. The price tag read $3,000. For Dennis, it was pocket change, but for the staff, that price tag was about to become a tripwire. She carefully lifted the dress from its display, admiring the intricate beadwork. As she held it up, Brad reappeared at her side, a vulture circling its prey. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, his voice thick with false concern, "but I don't think you realize how much that dress costs. It's $3,000. Well, that's a significant amount of money." He enunciated each word slowly, as if she were incapable of understanding. Dennis felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice even. "I can read the price tag," she replied coolly. "I'd like to try it on." Brad's eyes widened in theatrical disbelief. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of ridicule. "Try it on. Ma'am, I really don't think... do you even have $3,000? The question hung in the air, an audacious insult disguised as a practical inquiry. That's when Jennifer descended. She had been observing from afar while catering to Mrs. Hamilton, and now she moved in to support her subordinate. She approached with the unshakable confidence of someone who believes they are defending their territory. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her question directed solely at Brad, as if Dennis were an inanimate object. "She wants to try on the Valentino," Brad reported, his tone suggesting a grave offense had been committed. Jennifer's gaze swept over Dennis, a slow, deliberate appraisal of her clothes, her skin color, her calm posture. "I see," she said. "Well, we must be very careful. These are extremely expensive pieces. We can't just let anyone handle them." The implication was clear. Anyone meant people who looked like Dennis. Something inside Dennis finally shifted. This had moved beyond poor service into the realm of blatant discrimination. But instead of revealing her identity, she decided to push further, to see just how deep the rot went. "I understand," she said, her voice still calm but now laced with an edge of steel. "Can you tell me your policy on customer service? I'm curious how you determine who is allowed to shop here." Jennifer and Brad exchanged a knowing glance. They assumed she was a troublemaker, perhaps planning to file a complaint. They had no idea they were being cross-examined by the author of those very policies. "Our policies are quite clear," Jennifer stated with smug authority. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who does not meet our clientele standards. This is a luxury boutique, not a department store." Dennis nodded slowly. "Clientele standards," she repeated. "And what exactly are those standards?" Brad jumped in, eager to impress his boss. "Our VIP customers expect a certain atmosphere. They don't want to shop alongside people who may not appreciate the value of our merchandise." Dennis picked up a business card from the counter, her own company's card. She studied it for a moment. "Lux Boutique," she read aloud. "Founded on the principles of elegance, inclusivity, and respect for all customers." She looked up, her eyes locking onto theirs. "Is that accurate?" Jennifer's face flushed a deep crimson. She snatched the card from Dennis's hand. "We're not hiring," she snapped, "and we have very specific requirements for our staff." "People like what, Jennifer?" Dennis's composure was beginning to fray. "I'd like to speak with the owner." This was the final straw for Brad. He threw his head back and roared with laughter. "The owner?" he gasped. "Lady, the owner of this company is a brilliant, powerful businesswoman. She's worth millions. Do you honestly think someone like her would waste a single second on someone like you?" The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Here stood the owner, the brilliant businesswoman, being told that she herself would never deign to speak with herself. A few feet away, Mrs. Hamilton was beginning to look deeply uncomfortable. She had witnessed the entire exchange, and the blatant cruelty of it was unsettling. But Dennis wasn't finished. She opened her wallet and retrieved a platinum credit card, a heavy, metal card reserved for the ultra-wealthy. "I'd like to purchase this dress," she said, placing the card on the counter. Jennifer stared at it as if it were a forgery. She picked it up, turned it over, held it to the light. "This looks suspicious," she announced, her voice loud enough for the entire store to hear. "I'm going to have to call for verification." A wave of whispers rippled through the boutique. Customers turned to stare. Is she using a stolen card? Should someone call the police? Dennis stood her ground, a pillar of dignity amidst a storm of public humiliation. The card in Jennifer's hand was linked to accounts holding more money than the manager would see in 10 lifetimes. But instead of processing the sale, Jennifer was escalating the situation. "I'm calling security," she declared. Marcus, the guard, materialized instantly, having hovered nearby. He was an imposing figure, but as he approached Dennis, a flicker of conflict crossed his face. His training screamed, "Follow orders," but his conscience whispered that this was deeply wrong. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Dennis looked at him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He saw no fear, only a profound and unwavering strength that made him hesitate. "I am a paying customer," Dennis stated. "I have done nothing wrong." "You are disrupting the business," Jennifer proclaimed. "Leave now, or you will be arrested for trespassing." The store had fallen silent. Phones were now openly recording. Mrs. Hamilton looked horrified, not at Dennis, but at the staff. Dennis took one last look around her store, at her merchandise, at the employees who were treating her like a criminal. She let her gaze sweep over the faces of the other customers, some judgmental, some sympathetic, all captivated by the drama. Marcus gently took her arm. The touch was firm but not aggressive. He was simply doing his job. Dennis did not resist. She allowed him to escort her toward the door, her head held high. But just as she reached the threshold, she stopped. She turned and looked directly at Jennifer, then at Brad. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room. "You will regret this," she said. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, delivered with the cold certainty of fate. Jennifer smirked. Brad rolled his eyes. They believed they had won. They had no idea they had just signed their own professional death warrants. As Dennis stepped out onto the SoHo sidewalk, her phone was already in her hand. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, and they were about to crush everyone who had stood against her. The staff thought they had seen the last of Dennis. They were wrong. In exactly 7 minutes, she would walk back through those doors, and their world would detonate. Inside her Mercedes, Dennis gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She took a deep, steadying breath. The humiliation was a physical weight, but it was more than personal. It was a betrayal of everything she had built. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Sarah," she said, her voice low and controlled when her assistant answered. "We have a problem." Sarah Martinez had been Dennis's right hand for 5 years. She knew every nuance of her boss's voice, and the tone she heard now was one she recognized. It was the sound of a carefully contained storm, poised to unleash its fury. "Dennis," Sarah replied, her own voice instantly alert. "What's wrong? Weren't you supposed to be enjoying your shopping trip?" "I was testing the new store," Dennis said, her voice a low murmur. "Sarah, they didn't recognize me." A beat of silence stretched across the line, heavy with confusion. "I'm sorry, what? They didn't recognize you? How is that even possible?" "Because," Dennis began, and with each word her voice became harder, forged in a fresh, cold fury. "They saw a black woman in casual clothes and decided I didn't belong in my own store. They treated me like I was garbage, Sarah. They had me physically removed." Sarah's gasp was sharp, a crackle of disbelief through the phone. "Dennis, no, please tell me you're joking." "Do I sound like I'm joking?" Dennis asked, her tone flat and dangerous. "The store manager told me, to my face, that they don't hire people like me." The sales associate laughed when I asked to speak with the owner, said the owner was too successful to waste her time on someone like me. They called my platinum card suspicious and had security escort me to the curb. The silence on the other end felt like an eternity. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembled with a rage that mirrored Dennis's own. "Those idiots, they have no idea what they've just done, do they?" Dennis closed her eyes, and the glitzy facade of the street dissolved. Suddenly she was 12 years old again, standing in the sterile, overlit aisle of a department store, her mother's hand tight in hers. They had saved for months, carefully folding away dollars from double shifts to buy Dennis a dress for her graduation. Her mother had tried so hard to maintain her dignity, just as Dennis had today. She'd asked politely to see the dress, pulled out a small wad of cash that represented weeks of exhaustion, but it didn't matter. They were made to feel small, unwelcome, unworthy. Her mother had died 3 years later, never seeing the empire her daughter would build. But on that day, as they walked out empty-handed, she had made Dennis promise something. "Someday," she'd whispered, her voice thick with a pain Dennis was only just beginning to understand, "you're going to be in a position to make sure this never happens to anyone else." That promise was the bedrock of Lux Boutique. It wasn't just about profit. It was about creating spaces where dignity and respect weren't luxuries reserved for a select few. "This store was supposed to be different, Sarah," Dennis said into the phone, her voice cracking for the first time. "This was supposed to represent everything we stand for. Instead, it's become the very thing I built this company to fight against." "What do you need me to do?" Sarah asked, and Dennis could already hear the soft, rapid clicking of her assistant's keyboard. Dennis's voice dropped, barely a whisper, yet every word was as clear and sharp as shattered glass. "Call the lawyers, call corporate security, cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day. It's time someone reminded them who signs the paychecks." Back inside the boutique, Jennifer, the manager, was trying to restore a sense of normalcy. She smoothed her blazer, fluffed her hair, and plastered on her most reassuring customer service smile. But her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes kept darting toward the glass doors, as if expecting a storm to break. That's when David Chen walked in. David was the regional manager, a man who had climbed the company ladder over 15 years through sheer dedication. He was known for his surprise inspections, his meticulous attention to detail, and his unwavering loyalty to Dennis Sterling and her vision. Today was meant to be a routine check-in on the newest location. The moment David stepped inside, the color drained from Jennifer's face. His timing wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. "Jennifer," David said, his smile professionally warm. "Good afternoon. How are things?" "Oh, Mr. Chen." Jennifer's voice was a full octave too high, her cheerfulness brittle. "What a wonderful surprise. Everything's going perfectly. Just perfectly. We had a minor situation earlier, but it was handled, completely by the book." David had been in this business too long not to smell panic. Jennifer was talking too fast, smiling too wide. The air in the pristine store was thick with a tension that made his every instinct scream. He scanned the room. A wealthy-looking regular, Mrs. Hamilton, seemed deeply uncomfortable. Marcus, the security guard, stood stiffly, his gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance. And the young sales associate, Brad, wouldn't meet his eyes. "Is everything all right, Jennifer?" David asked slowly, his professional smile fading. "You seem on edge. Nervous? Me?" She let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Not at all. We just had a bit of a troublemaker, you see. Clearly looking to cause a scene, making our other clients uncomfortable. But don't you worry. We removed her before she could disrupt business." "Removed her?" David's voice sharpened. "What exactly happened here?" Before Jennifer could weave another lie, Mrs. Hamilton stepped forward. She had been a silent, shaken witness to the earlier events, but David's presence seemed to give her courage. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I was here. That woman wasn't causing trouble. She was trying to shop, and your staff treated her appallingly." Jennifer's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "Mrs. Hamilton, I appreciate your concern, but you don't understand the full situation. We have to protect the store's reputation." David's gaze swung from Jennifer's panicked expression to Mrs. Hamilton's resolute one. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "I want to see the security footage," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Now." That was it. That was the moment Jennifer knew it was over. The footage would show everything. Every condescending sneer, every dismissive gesture, the full, unvarnished humiliation. The footage?" she stammered. "I don't think that's necessary. As I said, everything was handled." "Jennifer." David's voice was now cold as ice. "That wasn't a request." But before she could respond, before another excuse could form on her lips, the front doors swung open, and Dennis Sterling walked in. This was not the casually dressed woman who had been ejected 30 minutes ago. This was Dennis Sterling, the CEO. She wore a black power suit so sharp it could cut glass, tailored to perfection. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown to judgment. Flanking her were three figures: a woman in a severe blazer clutching a briefcase, the lawyer, another woman with a tablet moving with brisk efficiency, the executive assistant, and a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit whose presence radiated corporate security. A profound silence fell over the store. Not just quiet, but a heavy, breathless stillness, the kind that precedes an explosion. David Chen's face went white as a sheet. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Miss Sterling?" he whispered, as if seeing a ghost. "I thought you were—" Dennis's voice sliced through the silence like a razor. "I was, until your staff threw me out of my own store." Jennifer's knees gave way. She grabbed the marble countertop to keep from collapsing. Brad looked as though he might be sick, all the color gone from his face. Marcus, the security guard, looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Dennis's voice resonated through the space, absolute and commanding. "Everyone, stop what you are doing, now!" Every person in the boutique, employees and customers alike, froze, turned to statues in a diorama of disaster. Dennis walked slowly, deliberately, through the aisles she had designed, past the displays she had approved, until she stood directly in front of Jennifer. She raised one perfectly manicured finger and pointed. "You," Dennis said, her voice a terrifyingly quiet hiss. "You're the woman who had me escorted out. I'm Dennis Sterling. I own this company." Jennifer tried to speak, but only a strangled rasp escaped her lips. But you weren't here for the opening." Dennis's smile was colder than a winter dawn. No, I wasn't. Do you know why? Because I was in Europe building this empire. I was closing deals worth more than you will see in 10 lifetimes, expanding the very company you just tried to ban me from. While I was doing that, you were here, single-handedly destroying your career in my newest store. The silence was so complete you could hear the frantic beat of Jennifer's heart. Mrs. Hamilton let out an audible gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Dennis continued, her voice carrying to every corner. This boutique was built with my money. Every garment on these racks exists because of my vision. Every paycheck you have ever received has my name on it. And 30 minutes ago, you treated me like I was something you scraped off your shoe. Jennifer was visibly shaking now. David looked as though he wanted to crawl into a hole and die. You told me, Dennis said, locking eyes with Jennifer, that you don't hire people like me. You, she shifted her gaze to Brad, who flinched, laughed when I asked to speak with the owner, said she was too successful for someone like me. You called my credit card suspicious. You had me physically removed from my own property. The colossal weight of their mistake was finally crashing down on them. This wasn't just some disgruntled customer. This was the architect of their world, the woman who could unmake their careers with a single word. And the most disgusting part, Dennis said, her voice rising with controlled, righteous anger, is that you did all of this because of how I look, because of the color of my skin, because you decided, based on nothing but your own shallow prejudice, that I didn't belong in a place that exists only because I do. Mrs. Hamilton was weeping openly now, tears of shame and fury streaming down her face. What happened next was a masterclass in consequence. David Chen, finally processing the sheer magnitude of the disaster, stepped forward. Miss Sterling, he began, his voice unsteady. David, Dennis cut him off, her tone all business now. I want you to hear exactly what happened in my store today. I want you to document every detail. This isn't just about them. This is about whether this company stands for anything at all. David nodded numbly, pulling out his phone and starting a recording. Dennis turned back to Jennifer. Let's start with you. The moment I walked in, what did you do? Jennifer's mouth flapped uselessly. I was just doing my job, she whispered. Your job? Dennis repeated, her voice soft and lethal. Was it your job to signal your sales associate that I was a threat before I'd even touched a single piece of merchandise? Was it your job to judge me by my clothes and decide I was unworthy? We have to be careful, Jennifer pleaded desperately. We have to protect the brand's image. We can't just let anyone... Stop. The word was a physical blow. You weren't protecting my brand. You were projecting your bigotry. There is a profound difference, and that difference just cost you your career. She began to pace, her heels clicking a slow, deliberate rhythm on the floor. Let me walk you through it, David, so you understand the full scope of this failure. She stopped at a rack of shimmering dresses. I picked up this dress. It costs $3,000. I personally approved its design. What happened next, Brad? Brad Morrison looked green. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. I just wanted to make sure you understood the price. You wanted to make sure I understood the price, Dennis echoed, her voice dripping with scorn. You assumed a black woman couldn't possibly afford it. You assumed I was too poor, too ignorant to be in my own store. And then you laughed. You actually laughed when I asked to speak with the owner. Brad's legs were trembling. I'm sorry, he croaked. I didn't mean... I was trying to help. Help? The anger in her voice was now a palpable force. You told me the owner was a successful businesswoman who would never waste her time on someone like me. You were talking about me, Brad. You were explaining that I would never deign to speak to myself. The crushing irony of it silenced the room. Dennis fixed her gaze on Jennifer again. And then came the credit card. Tell David what you did, Jennifer. Her voice was almost inaudible. I called it in as suspicious. You called it suspicious, Dennis repeated, letting the words hang in the air. A platinum card with a credit line that could buy this entire building's inventory outright. A card directly linked to the corporate accounts that fund this entire operation. You held it up to the light as if it were a cheap forgery, announced to the entire store that it looked suspicious, and humiliated me in front of every other customer. Mrs. Hamilton spoke up then, her voice shaking with emotion but clear. I watched the whole thing, she said, looking at David. I've been shopping in luxury stores for 40 years. I have never, ever witnessed anything so vile. Ms. Sterling was treated like a common criminal, and I stood by and said nothing. I will regret that for the rest of my life. Dennis gave the woman a brief, grateful nod before turning to Marcus, the security guard. Marcus, tell David what you were ordered to do. Marcus stood ramrod straight. I was instructed to escort you out, ma'am, he said, his voice filled with regret. I was uncomfortable with the order. You hadn't done anything wrong. You were polite and respectful. I followed the order. I shouldn't have. I failed to do what was right. At least you're honest, Marcus, Dennis said softly. At least you recognize that following orders is not a shield for injustice. Brad, seeing his life imploding, finally broke. Please, he whined, the sound pathetic and shrill. I need this job. I have student loans. I can't afford to be fired. I was just doing what I thought was right. I'm not a racist. I have black friends. I voted for Obama. It was all a misunderstanding. The silence that followed his desperate, cliché-ridden plea was deafening. Dennis looked at him with a sort of weary pity. Brad, she said, her voice calm again, the fact that you believe having black friends gives you a pass for your behavior tells me everything I need to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a series of choices. You chose to be condescending. You chose to judge me by my race. You chose to laugh at me. Choices have consequences. Jennifer, seeing Brad's appeal fail so spectacularly, tried a different tactic. She drew herself up, a flicker of her former arrogance returning. With all due respect, Ms. Sterling, she said, her voice hard, we were acting in the best interests of the company. We were trying to maintain an exclusive clientele. We were protecting the brand. The sheer audacity of the statement was stunning. Dennis's response was swift and devastating. You just admitted that, in your view, protecting my brand means discriminating against people who look like me. You have just proven beyond a shadow of a doubt why you are a liability I can no longer afford. Then Dennis's entire demeanor shifted. The icy CEO receded, and the woman, the daughter, spoke. Her voice became softer, more personal, yet it held more power than any command she had yet given. When I was 12 years old, she said, her voice resonating through the silent store, my mother and I were humiliated in a place very much like this one. We were made to feel that the color of our skin made us less than human. That day, my mother made me promise her that if I ever had the power to change things, I would. Everyone was listening now, captivated. I built this company to be a place of welcome, of dignity. Dennis continued, her voice thick with emotion but unwavering. Every store, every policy, every single hiring decision was meant to honor that promise. It was meant to be a testament to the value that my mother was denied. Today, in this store, you took my mother's memory and you ground it into the dust beneath your feet. It was founded on the radical idea that every person who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Dennis's voice began to rise, charged with a passion born of pain and righteous anger. I did not build this empire for people like Jennifer and Brad to use it as a platform for their prejudice. I did not work 18-hour days for 15 years so my stores could become places where people are judged by the color of their skin. I did not sacrifice everything to create something that would perpetuate the same discrimination that nearly destroyed my mother. David Chen, who had been listening to the confrontation with a mixture of horror and admiration, stepped forward. Ms. Sterling, he said, his voice firm, I want you to know that you have my complete support in whatever you decide. What happened here is unacceptable. It does not represent the values of this company or the standards you have set for all of us. Dennis gave David a grateful nod. She had expected no less. He had been with the company long enough to understand what it truly stood for. Thank you, David, she said. Now, let's talk about consequences. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Jennifer and Brad both went pale, looking as though they might faint. Jennifer Walsh. Dennis's voice now carried the full, unassailable authority of a CEO who had built an empire from nothing. You are terminated, effective immediately. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. You will be escorted from the premises by corporate security, and you are permanently banned from all Lux Boutique locations. Jennifer's legs gave out. She slumped against the counter, her face a mask of disbelief as the reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. Her career in luxury retail was over. This termination would follow her to every interview, every background check, every attempt to rebuild her life. Brad Morrison, Dennis continued, her tone as cold and final as a judge's gavel. You are also terminated. The same conditions apply. You will be escorted out, your access is revoked, and you are permanently banned. Brad's reaction was immediate and pathetic. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the store in front of customers and staff. Please, he sobbed, his voice cracking. Please don't do this. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll work for free. Please, I can't lose this job. The sight of a grown man groveling on the floor of a luxury boutique was profoundly uncomfortable, but Dennis looked down at him without a trace of sympathy. Brad, she said quietly, the time for apologies was before you chose to humiliate a customer. The time for sensitivity training was before you decided some people don't belong here. You made your choice. Now, you will live with it. Then Dennis turned to Marcus, and her voice softened, just slightly. Marcus, you were put in an impossible position. You were given an order by your supervisor, and your training taught you to follow orders. But you also knew, in your heart, that what you were doing was wrong, and you did it anyway. That is something you will have to carry. Marcus stood at attention, his face rigid, awaiting his sentence. However, Dennis continued, you were honest about what happened. You admitted your mistake and took responsibility. That means something. You may keep your job, but there are conditions. Relief washed over Marcus's face. He nodded quickly. You will undergo immediate diversity and sensitivity training, Dennis commanded. You will attend workshops on unconscious bias. You will learn to recognize when an order conflicts with basic human decency, and you will learn to find your voice when that happens. Can you commit to that? Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, his voice firm. Absolutely. Thank you for this chance. Dennis nodded once. Don't waste it. But she was far from finished. The terminations were only the beginning. She turned to David, her gaze filled with the focused intensity that had built her company. David, I want an emergency policy review at every single store. I want mandatory comprehensive training for all employees, not just new hires, everyone. I want mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds testing our stores every month with detailed reports on every complaint, every incident, every time a customer is made to feel unwelcome. David was already typing on his phone. Consider it done, Ms. Sterling. I'll have teams in place by next week. And I want it made clear to every manager, every sales associate, and every security guard in this company that discrimination will result in immediate termination. No warnings, no second chances, no excuses. Anyone who treats a customer with disrespect for any reason will be gone. As the security team escorted a silent, stunned Jennifer and a still sobbing Brad from the store, Dennis addressed the remaining staff and customers. I want everyone here to understand something, she said, her voice resonating through the now quiet space. This company was built on the principle that every person deserves respect. Today, that principle was violated. But I promise you, what happened here today will never happen again. Not in this store, not in any store that bears my name. Mrs. Hamilton, her face still streaked with tears, stepped forward. Ms. Sterling, she began, I want to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have stood up for you. Dennis looked at the older woman with a flicker of warmth. Mrs. Hamilton, the fact that you are speaking up now means everything. We cannot change the past, but we can learn from it. Mrs. Hamilton nodded, then surprised everyone. I would like to make a purchase. Several, in fact. I want to support what you are building here. The atmosphere in the store began to shift. An hour ago, it had been a place of tension and prejudice. Now, it was becoming a place of change. The staff looked at Dennis with a new understanding, a mix of awe and fear, realizing that respect was not a suggestion, but a requirement. Dennis spent the next few minutes personally greeting every customer, apologizing for what they had witnessed, and reassuring them that it did not represent her company. As the immediate crisis subsided, she gathered the remaining staff. What happened here today was a moral failure, she told them, her voice calm but unyielding. It was a betrayal of everything this company stands for. Your job is not just to sell clothes. It is to represent my values and my commitment to treating every human being with dignity. If you cannot do that, if you cannot treat every person who walks through that door with the same respect you'd show your own family, then you need to find another job. Because I will not tolerate prejudice. The message was received loud and clear. As Dennis prepared to leave, she gave the store one last look. David, she said quietly, I want weekly reports from this location for the next 6 months. The store is going to become a model for how we treat people, or it's going to close. Those are the only two options. David nodded. It will be a model, Ms. Sterling. I guarantee it. 6 months later, the SoHo location had become exactly that. A model not just for the company, but for the entire luxury retail industry. The story of that day had become a case study in how to confront discrimination with real consequences. Mrs. Hamilton was one of the store's most loyal customers. Marcus, having completed his training, was now an advocate for inclusion, sharing his story with new employees. And Dennis? She continued to visit her stores unannounced, not to test her employees, but to ensure the promise she had made to her mother's memory was being kept. The store that had been a stage for humiliation had become a symbol of redemption, proving that when prejudice meets unwavering principle, change is not just possible, it is inevitable.